All right, welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today, we're going to tackle a huge concept, one that's right at the center of our faith, but honestly, it's one that can be a little tricky to nail down. I'm talking about divine providence. We all use the word, right? But what are we really saying when we do? And how is it different from other big ideas out there?
So yeah, let's just dive right in. You've got these three big words floating around: sovereignty, providence, and fate. And they get mixed up and tangled together all the time, but they are not the same thing. So our job today is to pull them apart, really untangle them, and get a clear look at what makes each one unique.
Exactly. And the best place to start to really get some clarity is with the word itself, providence. Its meaning is kind of baked right into how the word is built. And what we're going to find is that it shows God is doing a lot more than just, seeing what's going to happen.
Okay, so here's the definition we'll be working with. From a theological standpoint, providence is the act of purposefully providing for or sustaining and governing the world. Now, if there's one word to circle and underline there, it's purposefully. That one word just completely changes the game. It tells us right away that God isn't some spectator sitting on the sidelines. No, he's an active, hands-on, intentional governor of, everything.
And you can actually see where that active meaning comes from if you just break down the word into its Latin parts. It's made of two pieces: pro, which means on behalf of, and vide, which means to see. Now, at first glance, you might think, oh, okay, so it just means to see ahead, like foresee.
But that's not quite it. It actually misses the real punch of the word. Think about how we say something similar in English today. If you tell someone, "Don't worry, I'll see to it," what are you saying?
Right, that's the perfect way to think about it. When you say, I'll see to it, you mean I'm on it, I'll take care of it, I'm going to make sure it happens. And that is the very heart of the biblical idea of providence. When we say God sees, we mean he sees to it. His seeing is his doing. Wherever God is looking, God is also working.
Okay, so keeping that active, seeing to it definition in our minds, let's make our first big distinction. A lot of confusion happens when we blur the lines between God's sovereignty and his providence. And look, they're definitely connected, but they're pointing to two different things.
So here it is, the key difference. Sovereignty, that's all about God's right and his raw power to do anything he wills. It's about his absolute authority. But providence? That's about how he uses that sovereignty. You could almost call it purposeful sovereignty. It's God's rule in action, always guided by his wisdom toward a specific goal.
And that idea of purpose, that brings us to another huge contrast we need to make. A purposeful providence is the complete opposite of the idea of a blind, impersonal fate.
Charles Spurgeon had this really powerful way of describing fate. He called it a blind thing. He said it's like an avalanche that just comes crashing down a mountain, wiping out a village below. There's no reason, no goal. It's just a destructive, random force. It just happens.
But then, right after that, he paints this incredible picture of providence as a contrast. He says it's not an avalanche, it's a rolling river. Think about that. A river has a source, it has a direction, and it has a destination. It's a powerful force, for sure, but it's moving with a purpose, working for the good of the human race, and especially for the good of his own people.
So, to kind of wrap up that point, Spurgeon borrows this amazing image from the prophet Ezekiel. He says providence has wheels full of eyes. It's guided by this incredible, all-seeing wisdom. Fate, on the other hand, is just blind necessity. One is personal and wise, the other is just empty and random.
And this active, seeing to it kind of governing, it isn't just for the big, headline-making events in history, not at all. The historic confessions of our faith are super clear about just how far God's providence reaches.
Yeah, and when you look at those historic confessions, you see this amazing unity on the topic. The Heidelberg Catechism talks about everything coming from his fatherly hand. The Belgic Confession says that nothing happens without God's orderly arrangement, which is a direct shot at the idea of random chance. And our own Westminster Confession is probably the most blunt, saying God governs all creatures, all actions, and all things, no exceptions.
And just to give you a sense of how detailed this is, the Westminster Confession adds this little phrase: God's providence extends from the greatest even to the least. Just let that sink in for a second. The scope is just massive. It means nothing, absolutely nothing, falls outside his purposeful control. Not the path of a planet and not the falling of a single sparrow.
Which, of course, leads us to the biggest question of all, the most glorious one. If God is governing everything with this much detail and purpose, what's the point? Why is he doing all of this?
Well, the answer really has two parts, but they're so tightly connected you can't separate them. The ultimate goal, first and foremost, is for God to put the full range of his own glory on display. But it doesn't end there. The second part is that this display of his glory becomes the very thing that brings eternal and ever-increasing joy to his people. So his glory and our good are wrapped up together as the final goal.
And we need to be really clear about what we mean by glory here. The Westminster Confession is careful not to narrow God's goal down to just one thing, like only his mercy or only his love. Nope. The whole point of providence is the praise of the glory of his entire character, his wisdom, his power, his justice, his goodness, and his mercy. It's the display of everything that he is.
So, we want to leave you with this to think about. If God isn't some distant, hands-off observer, but is instead an active, wise, and good governor who is directing everything from the biggest events in history down to the smallest details of your life, all for his glory and for our ultimate good, then how does that change how you see the world? How does it change how you see your own life? It's a truth that really can change everything. Thanks so much for joining us on Reformed Thinking.